go ahead and get started. We've got a critical mass of us here and we're just past 9 o'clock. Rosemary, would you like to kick us off with a welcome message?
I will. Welcome everybody on this spring day. I'm looking at Al's background with the rhododendrons, and it reminds me of things that are beginning to bloom in various places. And I think about our work together and the long game that we've been playing for addressing the needs of vulnerable citizens is a game that sometimes doesn't look like there are a lot of blossoms happening, but the seeds that are growing are really pretty powerful, and we'll hear about a lot of them today. And for any of you who are new, we are a loose coalition that's getting itself a little more firmly established with various things we're doing. We represent people from all perspectives that have to do with trying to provide opportunities for people who are homeless or who are vulnerable to homelessness to be able to live full lives. And so you'll hear a variety of updates about things. We're an open table, so we have a lot of meetings people can come to and share their skills and gifts, and we're looking for more people to participate with us in this very important work. We do have some norms for how we operate as a group together, and I don't know if you have that ready, Rob, but I can post it if you don't. One of the main things for getting recognized, because we do want to hear your voice, is this Zoom process has a raise hand feature. It's different places on different machines, but if you'd like to speak at some time during the meeting, just use that raise hand and Rob will recognize you or whoever is leading the discussion at that time. So for now, what I'd like to do is invite anyone who is new, who hasn't been here before with us, to participate in the conversation, to introduce yourselves, just your name, and if you're associated with an organization or a project, just let us know what that is. And then we have a chat. The chat function has been very good for us to use in providing information about ourselves, about events and meetings that are coming up. And in fact, since our meetings are usually very full, this is a good place to share your information. So it will be there and people can use it later. They can save the chat, or it's also available on our website. So with that, let me invite anyone new to introduce yourself. Just unmute and let us know who you are.
And I see Adam has his hand up.
Hi, Adam Reichenberger. I am the new Housing Policy Coordinator at Tacoma Pierce County Health Department.
Welcome, Adam. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is Michael Batoniak with the Health Department. I'm not new to this group, but I've been working with the COVID-19 vaccine community engagement team, and I will be transitioning out of this role to continue with some normal health department responsibilities starting on Monday. But Rihanna Betancourt is here. She will still be continuing that vaccine education and outreach for this group, and also supporting Jenny Sheppy, who works closely with the outreach teams to plan some of these vaccine events as well. So I just wanted to thank you all. It's been a pleasure working with all of you in this capacity. And I know Rihanna and Jenny will continue and do some great work. I'm very excited for what's to come. So thank you all again. It's been a pleasure.
Well, Michael, it's been good to have you here. And of course, the door is never closed. So with all the free time you have, you can join us anytime that works.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much.
Well, all right. And if people come in late, we'll just have to let them know to put their name in the chat, and so we know who they are. And Rob, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Rosemary. All right, so let's get started with our regular portion of the meeting. We kick off every week with a conversation about what we're seeing changing on the streets with our This Week on the Streets portion. The goal of this section of the meeting is to hear about any changes in what's happening with those who are living houseless right now, and any resources that folks could connect to help serve those who are living without a place to get indoors right now. So I open the floor to everyone. Feel free to raise your hand, and we'll see if we can share some information this morning. And please don't everyone talk at once. Jeffrey, I saw you unmute yourself. Did you have something to share?
Yes, I was out and about yesterday, got to 4 different camps, mostly along Yakima Avenue. Met up with Colin and Allison Needles from Tacoma Tribune. That went well. We got, she was able to get some good interviews. The encampment there is open to me bringing more garbage bags to them. Some interesting, starting some conversations about what do you want to see as a shelter? What's important to you? So I'm starting those conversations. And it seems to bring some hope, because I'm hearing the campers brighten up when I start talking about what's next, what can be next. And that was good. I also went to the 34th and Pacific encampment. And that one's morphing into a car and tent encampment. People who own the cars, but they live in the tents on that property. I don't know how long it'll stay that way, but it's kind of a unique arrangement that I haven't seen before. And I found some of my campers from 38th Avenue over on 705, and that was good. They're all doing well.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I see Jenny has her hand up.
So I wanted to give the update on Social Security cards. So a few members of the Permanent Supportive Housing team met with some folks at the local Social Security office here in Tacoma. Because this continues to be a struggle since the pandemic. The office has been closed. How do we obtain Social Security cards? So they were able to have a meeting. So here's what I can share with everyone. They understand kind of the struggle that we have been having, and the term that they used was the dire need for Social Security cards with the population that we're working with. So they have committed that if we call the local Tacoma Social Security office, they are doing in-person appointments. You have to make an appointment. You can't just walk into the office. And if we as a service provider let them know what the need is for, so obviously we were talking about permanent supportive housing individuals. So, hey, they have a permanent supportive housing referral, we need it for that. But if we say it's for housing, or it's for, whatever the need is, they will be kind of escalated to receive an appointment in the immediate. So we can help to escalate those appointments and get them an appointment right away. So they have committed to assist us as service providers in working with the population that we work with. So that was really, really great news. And thank you to our permanent supportive housing providers for having that meeting and working through that collaboration. So that was very exciting news.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah,
I'd
absolutely.
like to add, I'd like to add to that because I was part of that meeting. Just so you know that, so you can get an appointment, but the appointments go out, they can go out to like 60 days. and that is to get the card itself.
Mhm.
But you can get the piece of paper that has their name and the social security number instantly. So,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
they'll mail it to you.
And also, just another thing I would like to share with the group. So my previous experience has been, as a HR director. So if you're working on anything that's employment related with anyone, that piece of paper that they generate that says the social security card has been submitted for, here's the name, here's the social security number, that works for I-9 purposes. So that piece of paper that's immediately generated can be provided to an employer, and that works to get them employment for I-9 purposes. So just as a heads up to everyone, that's fine. They don't need the actual card. And Social Security mails cards. So make sure that whoever you're working with has either an address that they can receive mail, or they have mail services set up, which Associated Ministries provides. So they have somewhere to receive the card when it's going to be mailed out by Social Security Administration.
Thank you, Jenny.
Mhm.
So Verna has her hand up.
Yeah, I was going to give a street report. I'm over in West Tacoma by Titlow Park, and we've always had the occasional person sleeping in their car overnight, but there's been over the last couple of weeks a pretty big increase to where now there's like, instead of one once in a while, it's like 2 or 3 there every night. No encampments, but they're in their cars spending the night.
And that's just along the side of the park there on 6th Ave.
Right, there's parking spots across from the tavern.
Yeah.
And on that side of the park. And then when I take my morning walk, I'm seeing like 2 or 3 people sleeping in the car in the mornings.
Thank you. Sherry, I see your hand up.
Oh, I just dropped it in the chat too.
Oh, okay.
Wondering how long the Social Security appointments are being scheduled out, and if we just call our local Social Security office, or is there a particular number that we call?
Call the local Tacoma office. You can look it up on the Social Security website, and they can be up to 60 days out. I'll drop some additional information in the chat for some online options as well.
Oof, great. Okay. We did, as an employer, one of our biggest barriers is getting folks that I-9 documentation, as you know, Jenny. So one of our hire crew supervisor, she was doing some research, and individuals can also register and make an account online and order their Social Security online too. So we have not tried that out, but we just found that out, trying to collect as much information as possible for our toolbox. So thank you.
Correct. That's just what I was going to drop in the chat. So if they do an online My Social Security account, they can get the documents that they need online. So I'll drop that information in the chat so everyone has it. We do that quite frequently with our clients. So.
Awesome. James, you have your hand up.
Thanks. Totally unrelated to Social Security, but I just wanted to send out some information to folks. My name is James Hogue, and I'm the Executive Director of Homeless Services at Comprehensive Life Resources. We run a youth and young adult shelter. We have a large homeless outreach team and do some case management support for employment and housing. And one of our biggest kind of activities that we do on our outreach side is our mobile clinic, which we've sort of put on pause up until the last week or two. We had some staff turnover and other issues, but I'll put it in the chat. I did a presentation, or at least a brief conversation a couple of weeks ago, but you can go to our piercecountyresources.com website, which you can find from the coalition website, and under the section mobile clinic, you'll see the locations that we've determined meet our criteria. Our goal is to find a campsite that has 20 or more structures or tents where people are sleeping, and preferably that it's not set up to be relocated or evicted anytime soon. And our goal is to go every week and build support as we start to work with folks and develop relationships. We do coordinated entry. We now have Tacoma Pro Bono joining us on our first site, which is under the 509 bridge. You can see on that list, but we're totally open to partnering with other providers. And our goal is by the end of next week to have our next 2 sites situated and determined and starting to go to 3 mobile sites per week. So we have a van, we have about 6 or so social workers. And again, like Homo Pro Bono has joined us on our current location. But again, if you work for an agency that does outreach and or work, or you want to participate and volunteer, bring food, blankets, whatever, this is an opportunity. We do ask that you're under the protection, I guess, for liability's sake of an agency that has designated you, safe to do outreach and all of that stuff. And we have some COVID requirements, and we have we don't support this time to be used to offer either religious or political services. So we're asking to really be in line with just social services or financial, medical, mental health support type stuff, legal support. So if that's you, I'll put my email in the box so you can reach out. We can talk if it might be a good fit to join us on the mobile clinic. Or if you're a community member who happens to be adjacent to an ever-growing encampment, there is a link to request a mobile clinic in your area. We love neighborhoods that endorse the idea of bringing services on site to some of the camp areas. So if you're in a neighborhood, there's a camp growing. If you're looking for relocation, that's going to be somebody else. But if you're looking for support for these individuals, please use that link and request a mobile clinic in your neighborhood. And they're anywhere in Pierce County. We can go anywhere in Pierce County. Generally, we stick pretty close to Tacoma just because that's where the largest encampments are, but we can go wherever the need is.
Thanks, James. And Sherry, you still have your hand up. Did you have something to add?
No, I just don't know how to put it down. I don't usually raise my hand. I just talk.
I'll fix that.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. So any last comments for this portion of the meeting? All right. Well, thanks everybody for sharing the information. That's the exact reason why we do this part of the meeting. So you may have noticed that we had a little bit of a later agenda than usual this week, and we had a presentation cancel. So in brainstorming a little bit, Garrett offered to do something that he hasn't done for, I don't know, 18 months, something like that. Overview or a primer on our homeless system in Pierce County. So I will turn the floor over to Garrett and we can learn.
Well, some of you know all this really well, so I expect you to be chirping in with additional information in the chat, or sniping at me or telling me where I'm wrong, because things change. I am going to go through in 20 minutes how our formal and some of our informal parts of the homeless system operate. Why is this useful to know? Well, first, if you've got folks that are experiencing homelessness and need to engage the system, it's good to know how to do that. Again, I know lots of you know this already, but sometimes it's good to hear all the peripheral parts. It helps me to do the research on these before I do the presentations because things change. Another reason is we're putting a bunch of energy into designing the comprehensive homeless system for Pierce County. Our coalition has a really active role with that county-led initiative. And in order for us to do a good job building a better comprehensive homeless plan, we need to identify the places there where the system is working, where the system isn't big enough, and where the system isn't working so well, so we can work on getting changes made. So folks that want to add information into the chat, I would love that. What I would love even more is for you to identify things you think we can do better, or populations you think we're not serving well with particular interventions that I described. So I'm hoping chat is flowing with some ideas from you guys on what we need to be doing better or different or more of while I go through. Homelessness in Pierce County, a primer. By me, your fine Director of Operations. What we're going to cover today, we are going to talk about the outreach system, we're going to talk about the shelter system, and we're going to talk about the pathways and programs around permanent housing. I can't do it without data, and so this is just to remind you the flows we have into homelessness. And sometimes I get in little arguments about data, but nobody argues with me about this data. This is every week the number of people starting a new homeless episode. And we average about 240. And recently you can see it's dropped. You don't really need to see the numbers, but on the right, the numbers have dropped a bit, mostly because of the impacts of COVID-19. Whatever those are, eviction bans, fewer social service workers on the streets, we're still doing 200 people a week. So our system has to be designed to provide resources for 200 people becoming homeless a week. That means we have to help 200 people get out of homelessness every week to stay afloat. The number of people actually homeless is far more controversial, but we really need to build the system for the flow and not necessarily for the size of the population, if that makes sense. I mean, we need enough shelters for the population, but you need enough interventions to help the people as they become homeless. And in the top, we have the chart of our point in time count, which shows a steady decline, although this last year was higher, a steady decline in the number of people we count experiencing homelessness, which is a little bit different than what we see anecdotally. So that's probably not the most accurate tool for lots of reasons, but still really good to look at. The bottom one is a worst case scenario of how many people are homeless in Pierce County. And some of this has to do with increases in how we better keep track of people within the homeless management system. But really, I would just look at the growth. And I think this is pretty representative of the growth of homelessness in Pierce County. Again, kind of flattening off in the last year. I know that's tough to see in the slide, but that probably has to do with the effects of COVID-19. And lots of us think we're going to spike up once the eviction moratorium is lifted, or at least see a pretty steep incline in 6 or 12 months following that. People come from all over. This top map, again, hard to see the details. This is a map of Pierce County, basically. And the dots on the top map tell us where people were living before they became homeless, right? So pretty spread out around Pierce County, not so much on Mount Rainier, an awful lot more in Tacoma. And the bottom map, this is about the same amount of time, tells us where people spent the prior night, right? So where did you live before and where are you sleeping now? And you can see most people are coming into Tacoma to stay, although not everybody. Okay, that's kind of my background because I have to do data. And now I'm going to jump into the formal system, outreach. So outreach is a big part of our formal homeless system. James Pogue was talking about comprehensive life resources. They are funded by the county or the feds through the PATH program and other funding streams, Greater Lakes Mental Health, Tacoma Rescue Mission. I'm going to lump critical time intervention in here. That's work Jenny's crew does. And that's, a lot of this is case management, right? So these folks don't necessarily have, a shelter they run or a housing program they run, but they're helping folks to get what they need in order to get there, right? So Jenny's group obviously takes them from the moment they encounter the homeless system until they're permanently housed, but that kind of all exists. There's also a pretty good sized informal system, and this is groups that I can't think of right now, but they're providing lots of food. Like when I go to the encampments, I see food being delivered, right? And so they're doing outreach and providing, basic life, sustaining resources to folks. And this is a big front door to our homeless system. So James Pogue mentioned they do coordinated entry, which we'll talk about a bit more, but coordinated entry is our pathway into permanent housing. And so you can get coordinated entry through our outreach system in the formal parts, right? So Rescue Mission can do that. Greater Lakes Mental Health can do that. Comprehensive can do that. But not all of the informal, right, are really a good front door into the homeless system. And it would be great to change that. Programs like what Dana Peterson and Catholic Community Services are running, the CHIRP program is an attempt to do that, is to get coordinated entry out into the informal system so that they can get into the front door to get some of the resources we'll talk about later. And now would be a great time to put your contact information in the chat, Dana. Just saying. Homeless prevention is an interesting part that is new in Pierce County, or at least much bigger in Pierce County since COVID-19. So what I hear a lot, and I'm sure you hear too, is wouldn't it be better if we just stopped homelessness from happening? And that's very true. But we have a pretty tiny homeless formal rent assistance system and homeless prevention in Pierce County, or we did until COVID-19. And that's changed pretty dramatically. But it's not a homeless prevention program as HUD typically designs them. So homeless prevention idea is you provide rent assistance for someone and case management so that at the end of their period of housing instability, they're going to be much more self-sufficient and able to remain going. And that is not what we're doing with most of our rental assistance programs, right? They're really just meeting immediate financial need and not providing any case management at all. And there's lots of informal systems that do homeless prevention too. This is mostly religious groups, churches, St. Vincent de Paul. They provide a lot of these types of resources. And these stop homelessness, but they're incredibly expensive relative to how much homelessness they stop. If that makes any sense. So you get money into people's hands that need it, but you end up helping a lot of families that wouldn't become homeless. And so it's been something that's frowned upon through much of the formal homeless system across the country because of its really high cost relative to how many people you actually prevent from entering homelessness. And I've got to dig up the research on that. But when I find it, I'm going to send it out again because it's kind of interesting. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It's just, that's a little explanation of why we haven't done much. Shelters are a big part of our homeless system. And shelter, I mean anything from safe parking, day centers, hygiene stations, up to, you know, the lovely apartment that LASA operates as part of its shelter system, right? So again, shelter is usually in the world of homelessness is day center or night shelter. And those things have been merged largely in Pierce County. So things like Adam Street Shelter for Families and Nativity House and the YWCA's Domestic Violence Shelter and Lehigh Shelters. Those are 24/7 operations. So they're a mix of day center for the overnight guests and overnight. But this can be safe parking. And again, there's a pretty big formal system, not nearly big enough, but pretty big, that has, you know, Catholic Community Services Family Day Center or lots of, and they vary, right? So there's congregate settings like the Rescue Mission's downtown campus or Nativity House, right? People are sharing everything, sleeping space, loafing space, bathing space, eating space, to what I call less congregate. And that's where folks have separate sleeping and separate loafing spaces, but they're sharing hygiene and food spaces, right? So an example of that would be something like the Lehigh shelters or the Stability site, right? And then we have non-congregate. And a good example of that's the YWCA, where it's essentially apartments, right? So they're sleeping, bathing, hygiene, and food is all happening in private space. So that's non-congregate. Or our hotel-based programs, right? Catholic Community Services has a number of hotel rooms. Other agencies do too. There's also an informal system around shelters, and I will go ahead and call those encampments. So people sleep where they have to, and if there's not shelter space, which there isn't, then they're going to end up anywhere. And so that can be in people's backyards. It can be with permission on someone's property. It can be without permission. So lots of things we do informally, but those are still shelters. They're just not part of our homeless system. How are we doing? I haven't even looked at the chat. You guys can chime in with questions too.
So there are a few questions that have come up in chat. If you want to scroll back.
Boop, boop, boop. All right. All right, can you read them to me? I'm not seeing them here.
Yeah, let me see. One was from Sherry Jensen a while back saying she's been on multiple presentations with Heather Moss lately, who is saying we need housing for 1,500 unsheltered individuals and that our current county has about 600 shelter beds currently available. She said that using she was using HIMIS and not PIT, not the point in time count. Can you speak to those numbers? It seems quite different than the numbers you have graphed.
Sure. I don't know why they use those shelter bed numbers. Those are a theoretical number based on identified capacity inside the HMIS system. And so it shows 167 beds in Nativity House, which don't exist right now because of social distancing from COVID-19. It shows shelters that no longer operate, such as the emergency shelter that operated by Sherry's team outside of Eastside Community Center. It shows beds that don't really exist. So if you have, say, 15 rooms and each one can hold up to 6 people and you're housing families and you put one family in each room, you can have your shelter completely full because every unit is used. However, you have beds available, but you really can't put a 3-year-old in the open bed in one of your bedrooms if it has 3 family members from another family in just one other bed, right? So it's kind of one of those things where, yeah, I guess you could make the numbers say that, but it's just complete BS. Like there's no connection to reality. And I've explained that to the county. I don't know why they would do that, but there we are. And our website, I'll put the link in later, but our website has my calculation of open shelter beds, usually about 40 in the county. And it's typically places that are difficult to meet the entry requirements. So you need to be a clean and sober veteran willing to live in Ording to use the Roosevelt Barrack beds, right? So they fill a bunch of them, but not all of them, right? Or you need to be referred by Puyallup in order to use some of the, Salvation Army beds, right? Well, if Puyallup police aren't referring people, then those beds sit empty.
Thanks, Garrett. And I had just a brief follow-up to that. So that 1,500 unsheltered that need shelter beds. So if we're looking to end street homelessness by November of 2021, is 1,500 the number that we are aiming to create shelter space for?
Another interesting question, and I don't know. I can get that number as high as as high as about 4,500 if I look at everybody that has recent activity in HMIS. If I pull a bunch of stuff that's probably poorly maintained older data, not looking at you, some providers on this call, I can drop it down to maybe 2,500. How many of those really need shelter? I don't know. I don't know how the county calculated the 1,350 is the most recent one I saw. That might not be a bad number to work to. I don't know that I've never had a number I felt was good for how many shelter beds we really need. I see so many people homeless in the system, but it's hard to imagine there's that many floating around. However, we'll never know we won't know until November 1st when we actually have enough shelter bed and we watch them fill up, right? So I think 1,350 or 1,500 is probably a really good number.
Thanks, Garrett. And Kathy Ryan made a request if you could come do this presentation with her staff. That's great.
Ooh, love doing this presentation. It's my chance to be an insufferable know-it-all.
Okay. Oh, and Jan Rumbeck makes the comment, ending street homelessness by November 1 is the goal, not homelessness.
Thank
you. I
you.
think that's an important distinction. All right, I think that's it for the main questions that I see right now.
All right, I threw my PowerPoint into the chat there as well. So if you want to link to the PowerPoint. Shelter, yes, shelter. Huge topic for us. And we can go on and on about the challenges or the opportunities of shelter, but let it be known that most of it is formally funded by the county and the cities, but not all of it. Diversion. So now we're going to get into our permanent housing interventions. We use intervention, meaning time when somebody enrolls in a program to get something done. So this is our least expensive intervention, and it's terribly named. Diversion has got to be the worst name ever. The original purpose of that was talking about diverting people from shelter. So one of the models that was looked at when this system was designed was a program that had folks at the front door of the shelter, and basically they had a conversation, which was, we don't have enough shelter beds. What else could you possibly do instead of coming into shelter? And our programs never quite looked like that, but we still call it diversion. So it's financial assistance and counseling and just kind of problem solving in order to figure out what could possibly be a quick solution to get either temporary or permanent housing. So this is our only intervention where there's a positive outcome, is temporary housing. And the thought is, if we never have enough shelter beds, it's better to be staying with a friend or family temporarily than to be on the streets. And this is super successful. Lots of people take this program up. It's part of coordinated entry. So anytime you have a coordinated entry conversation, you get offered diversion, right? And again, it's really just, it's strength-based, working with what you've got available in your social net, right? And maybe you've got enough, you've got a job, you can get into an apartment, you can sustain it with the rent, but you can't afford to get in, right? So this program can provide that money. Or you've got family in, you know, in Bellingham that you can go live with, you just can't get up there, right? So we can put you on a bus if we're sure that that's really a permanent housing destination. So super successful. And again, it's about $1,200, $1,400 per intervention. So it's not a very expensive intervention relative to lots of our other costs. And again, it's part of coordinated entry. And that's why it'd be great to have this offered to everybody that touched any part of our homeless system, right? Even the informal parts, because then they could get offered that. Question is, what would it take to expand diversion? It's one of our options for any street homelessness. That's a good question. I don't know how close we are to having enough coordinated entry and diversion resources. And so that would just need some analysis. It's pretty cheap though, probably less than $1 million would make sure we had enough financial assistance and all that. It doesn't work for everybody, right? If you owe $6,000 to your past landlord, this is not going to be a tool to get you moved in, right? If you can't sustain rent on your own, this is not, you know, and you don't have family, this is not an intervention that works for you. So it's targeted at our low vulnerability, right? Or low barrier clients that we can interact with. And about half people give it a try, a little less than half, and a little less than half of those are successful. There's a high return rate. So you're probably looking at 15 to 20%, but still maybe a little higher. Pretty good though. And there's an informal system that does a lot of this, again, out of churches. So people come to a church with a story, they have a benevolence fund of some sort, and so they assist with that. Private individuals assist with this stuff too, right? So there's a big informal system, but also a really functioning run. And this is sort of best practices nationwide, kind of piloted by places like Pierce County. Our second big intervention in Pierce County and nationwide is called rapid rehousing. And rapid rehousing is a formal program where basically you cover rent for somebody for 6 months while they've got to find a landlord willing to rent to them. And the program covers rent or a portion of it for 6 months while that individual gets themselves to a point where they can be self-sufficient. So rapid rehousing case manager doesn't put somebody into an apartment that there's no hope of them sustaining on their own, right? And so that's a challenge of this program, is if there aren't landlords willing to rent to people, or if the rents aren't low enough, rapid rehousing really struggles. And this is targeted at mid-level vulnerability. So not people that need one little step to get going, but somebody that needs to work on something, work on education, work on employment, work on mental health, work on substance use, whatever they want to work on. So this is classic housing first. This serves everybody, right? It's targeted at mid vulnerability or low vulnerability, but it can help people that are highly vulnerable if there's pathways for them to be self-sufficient. And again, it helps everybody right where they are, right? It's not part of, these aren't phases of your homelessness, right? This is an intervention that could be the only, the only interaction you have with the homeless system, right? You do coordinated entry, diversion doesn't work for you, so you end up in rapid rehousing, right? You don't have to be in a shelter to use it. You can be, right? But it's pretty good. It's about $6,000 to $8,000 per intervention, and it's very successful. Nationwide, it's around 75 or 80% successful. In Pierce County, it's about 60% successful. because we give this intervention using a system of prioritization and vulnerability. So instead of giving it to low and mid vulnerability clients, we give it to high vulnerability clients. And it turns out they have a much harder time being successful, and because of lots of reasons. And there's really not a kind of an informal equivalent to this. And this largely, let's see, I'd love to see. Yeah, and so that's one of the heartbreaks of rapid rehousing, is that we do it because we prioritize resources to the most vulnerable. And that means that we waste a lot of effort on folks that aren't going to be successful with this, right? So get them in an apartment and they'll end up with an eviction because they aren't able to sustain, right? Not because the case manager is bad, just because it's maybe not the right intervention for them. So again, does amazing things, but maybe not best how we do it. I know I'm taking up too much time. I'm just wrapping up, Rob. Transitional housing is what we've replaced. Almost all money that used to go to transitional housing in the formal system now goes to rapid rehousing. And the reason is that because they target the same populations, this mid-vulnerability. However, transitional housing typically has high barriers to entry. Typically, you have to have facilities. Oftentimes, they require people to be work ready, whatever that means. They require people to be mentally stable. They require them to be clean and sober. So it's not housing first in that they don't take everybody. They're a bit limited. And it's a longer intervention, 12 to 18 months. You live someplace. Typically, you bank money while you're there so that when you exit transitional housing, you have a little nest egg to help you get established in your own housing. So it has the same independent outcome at the end where you're self-sustaining rental on the, in the marketplace. However, because it's a long program and they're living on a site, it's expensive. So you're looking at an $18,000 to $22,000 per intervention. So again, $6,000 to $8,000 for rapid rehousing, same outcomes. And so that's why it's replaced transitional housing. But we still have transitional housing because it works for some populations. So it doesn't not work, right? It works, it's just expensive, but it's appropriate for some populations, typically youth and veterans. Although we have a number of programs, and there's a massive, and so that's the formal transitional housing program. There's a lot of programs that call themselves transitional housing that have a very similar model, but are an informal system. Sometimes nonprofits run them, sometimes for-profits run them. And so those are things where somebody buys a house, they're renting rooms out, and they've got, kind of some transportation to AA meetings, and they're clean and sober. All right, that's a common model. And those, again, can be very effective for people, but there's very little set of common rules or practices. So I often think of them as being, a little bit it's challenging to refer clients to because you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. Again, there's great programs that are run, but there's some that are a little bit dicey. And but that's a huge thing. And it's like, but if we didn't have them, we would have a lot of people exiting treatment that wouldn't have any other options of where to live, the informal system. So it's an important part of our homeless system. Next slide is where I put Oxford houses. My last slide, sort of, is permanent supportive housing. And this is the intervention that we use for our most vulnerable. And permanent supportive housing is, again, it's a federal program. It's housing first, right? So we take people as they are, where they are, and provide them with an apartment and case management for the rest of their lives, right? Use the Section 8 vouchers typically, although not always. There's lots of models. The ones that are funded by the feds require a documented disability for the head of household. And this is incredibly effective. People typically either stay a few years and move on or stay forever. And again, it guarantees housing. It's for people that probably couldn't be housed even with a Section 8 voucher unless they had case management. Someone's asking definitions of vulnerability. So vulnerability is, in Pierce County, we've got our own custom vulnerability barrier ranking. It's not known to me. It's kept secret in a black box. And we collect information about people. Are you pregnant? Are you a sex offender? Do you have disabilities? Although we don't actually use the disability in the prioritization. Are you impacted by disabilities? How many times have you been arrested? How many times have you been to the emergency room or seen crisis care, right? So impacts of disability. All of that gets kind of shaken into a big bowl. And then every day the county creates a list of every person in waiting for interventions, right? So they went through coordinated entry, didn't do diversion. They're in what's called the priority pool. And they are organized by highest need, most vulnerable to lowest need, least vulnerable. And when there's an opening in a program that uses a referral system that AM operates, Associated Ministries, they basically filter the list for people eligible for the program, right? So if we're looking at, say, a program for veterans at the Ording campus, right, we would be looking for people that right, are clean and sober, because it's a clean and sober site, don't have a felony, are a veteran, and then we take the next most vulnerable. So that's kind of what I mean, not really boxes, right, but kind of this linear list. However, people fit basically into 3 tiers, right? Very low vulnerability, kind of this middle area, and then our very high vulnerability. Like when you look, there's a score that gets given, and so they kind of group in this way. Hopefully that was useful. There's also a massive informal system of permanent housing. So not supportive or somewhat supportive, that isn't federally funded, but kind of operates, right, in this sort of affordable housing, or, you know, this Oxford House model a little bit. There's a place in Thurston County that's presented to us. It does some really neat stuff that doesn't get much federal funding. And even like the big providers, they'll have a mix. Like Catholic Community Services has stuff that it's not technically permanent supportive housing, but it is, right? So there's a lot of things that are kind of on the edge and important, and are typically known by folks that are working within the rapid rehousing system, because those can be destinations for rapid rehousing. A question, does Pierce County track those returning to homelessness by demographics? Yes, they do. All that information's in the HMIS system. How much they publish it, I don't know, but that data's all there. Yeah, and Colin's right. Rapid rehousing, you always want to ramp that up because it's so inexpensive relative to everything else and so beneficial. But if you don't have landlords, if you don't have rental, right? I mean, our population increases faster than our housing supply increases every year for the past decade, right? So there's more pressure on the housing system every year. I've got this beautiful chart. I'm wrapping up now. I honestly am wrapping up, Rob. I lied about 20 minutes, clearly. 10, 15,000 people a year flow into homelessness. The size of the arrows in this little chart are the number of people flowing through. Red, homeless, bad, right? Lots of folks head into the shelter system. Our most expensive shelters can be about $33,000 a year. That's crazy expensive. You're talking $20,000 probably for something like the Stability site, a little bit less than that for some of the Lehigh sites. Nativity House and the Rescue Mission are much cheaper, again, just because of the design of the program and how space is used. Lots of people come through coordinated entry. And then again, a big chunk of our arrow goes into diversion. And rapid rehousing, not so much. Very few people into transitional housing. Again, this is our formal system. I don't know the informal transitional housing system because it's not centrally tracked, right? And that's actually one of the reasons I don't really trust it. It's not necessarily because I don't trust the people and the programs. They're not publishing their data in the way that programs that are funded by the feds have to publish their data. So we don't know either, you know, how many people are coming in, how many going out, what their vulnerability is, what their demographics are, what their returns to homelessness are. Like, we don't know any of that. And so it's hard to know exactly the performance. And then even smaller is permanent supportive housing, because it's forever, right? Half of those are typically buildings built by agencies. The other half are using, you know, market rate landlords. And then lots of people get housed. Lots of people disappear. And this is actually why it's hard to know how many people are homeless, because so many people self-resolve or wander off or stop engaging with the homeless system. So I'm hoping in a world of shelter for all, that number will be known, because there won't be people on the streets. They'll be in places that they're willing to live, that we can know where they are so we can build the system for them. I'm going to put a link into my super fun flow to homelessness and these different interventions we talked about. You can stick money into them. I'm not really, well, I guess, oh, why not? There's this tool here, and you can put money into it, and you can run the model like, oh, that's great. This is how homelessness is going to grow over the next 5 years. Red line is the total homeless population in Pierce County. You can argue with me on the numbers all you want, but this deals with flows, right? So really, wherever it starts, it's really all about flows. You can say, well, what if I put what if I put more money in diversion? Okay, I'm going to go from 1.5 million to 2.6 million, and I'm going to run my model. Oh, look at that, right? I'm still growing, right? I still have a higher number at the end of 5 years, but it's gotten smaller. I guess I need to put money into rapid rehousing. Well, I'm feeling rich, so I'm going to go from an $8 million to an $18 million system. What's that going to look like? Woohoo! Look at that bad boy dropping, but still rising some. There's kind of a baseline, probably of 1,000 people will always have homeless. Sounds depressing, but that's just our, that's who flows into homelessness every month. But I do need to put some money into permanent supportive housing because diversion and rapid rehousing only help low vulnerability and mid vulnerability. I need to help the highly vulnerable. So I'm going to put maybe, I don't know, maybe some another, say 9 million a year into permanent supportive housing. Let's play rich. And then I run my model, right? And I see a pretty dramatic drop, right? And there's weird stuff going on in my model because it's so sophisticated. Wow, Garrett. But I'm happy to talk about that or any of these other things. And I think I took too much time, but boy, it's sure fun talking about this stuff.
I don't know that you took too much time, Garrett.
Sweet.
What I will say though is I'm sure there's going to be some questions from folks that maybe they haven't put in the chat. So if you want to raise your hand and ask questions, this would be a great chance to pick Garrett's brain. Yeah, Colin, I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, I was just writing something in the one. Thank you, Garrett. This is always really good information to see on paper or just see the data because I think none of us, that's what we're always wondering about. I do think that there is space with, Maureen's comment about transitional housing and what is this non-traditional or whatever. I do think that there is a space for our community to transition from transitional housing, what is historical transitional housing, into something, call it interim housing, call it what you want, but it's temporary housing, longer term. I think really it's really what we're seeing with the tiny house villages or the micro shelters. I mean, to me, that's something more. And if you know Lehigh's programs, it's a lot more prescriptive. It's a lot closer to transitional housing than it would be to permanent supportive housing. So I definitely think that there's space in that area for something that is more tailored, less restrictive, not these kind of hard timelines of 12 to 18, but really kind of that idea of 6 to 12 or even less if possible. So it just seems like there's a kind of a gap in our system that used to be filled by transitional, and there's just a need for those people that maybe, like Maureen was talking about, they're not quite ready, and hotels could be a great opportunity, I do think, but they're not quite ready for that rapid rehousing jump yet, and they're ready to get out of the shelter, or they don't need to be in the shelter. We're wasting their time. We're wasting shelter space. So I think that's just an interesting area in the middle.
Thanks, Colin. And these things get put in buckets, but to your point, they're a continuum, right? Is the stability side a shelter or transitional housing? I would probably argue transitional housing at this point, right? Even though it has a lot of shelter components, right? And there's actually a federally funded program that merges transitional housing and rapid rehousing together. And I'm a little obsessed with that model, but I've never been able to get one up and running. But no, again, it's an excellent, things don't have to fit into one of these categories, but they're a good way to think about how the feds and how the state and how the county and city think about things.
Teresa.
I always love it when Garrett presents, and his data is always much more entertaining than most data. I do want to just put this out there, and I've said this before, when you see that someone stops interacting with coordinated entry, people that I speak with who are on the streets or who come through our program, often say, I stayed on the bottom of the list and nothing happened. And I know that occasionally that list is purged, and if people don't come back and sign up again, it's more likely that it's because they don't believe anything's going to happen, that they have it resolved. So I just question the thing about this gets resolved by diversion, especially that one, because I know a lot of people who've been diverted and never found housing. They just gave up. So I know it's a kind of negative take on it, but it's not as neat as it may look.
Thank you. And someday I'll do something on the pathways people take through our homeless system, which is, again, what we know, maybe not their own reality. Yeah, but so half the people that try diversion aren't successful with it, right? And typically, right, we've been under-resourced and everything else. So yeah, we don't really know what happens to them, right? Or they're just living out front of Teresa's house, right? Because they're not vulnerable enough to get the intervention, or they can't get organized enough. I remember I think there's a few people on this call that helped with a friend of mine that eventually got a permanent supportive housing referral. And, he had magical thinking going on, right? He was not really able to take care of himself, but he was also unwilling to admit that he had a mental illness that could be documented. And so the process of getting him, even with the referral, from where he was into that unit required something that was really challenging, and it took a village, and we got him in, and he's still housed there. But super messy. We don't know what happens to so many people, and it bums me out because can't improve systems when you don't know outcomes.
And Garrett, you can see Tony's comment.
Yes. Yeah, I often hear that the system's really complicated, and I agree. I love the CTI idea of having a case manager that's with you your entire intervention. However, that goes back to something I really ought to be working on, which is pay for our staff, right? So it's really hard for people to stay in their positions when pay is so low in the homeless system. And so a lot of times people are cycling in and out. And so, but no, to that point, it would be nice if it was simpler. We pretend it's simple, right? It always makes sense in my head because I've obsessively studied it. But yeah, I mean, what do you do different? You can't even make programs similar because each one works itself to serve unique niches of populations that they identify. And so it's an interesting question. And some of that problem is the failure of us to resource coordinated entry. Coordinated entry works great. It would work really, if we had enough permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, but we don't, right? So coordinated entry feels like a failure because it's the airport model, right? We build a huge waiting area. We just don't have enough planes coming into the airport, right? So nobody has a good experience if they don't get where they're going, even if you've got, nice, charging stations next to the seats in the waiting room.
I see Colin's got his hand up.
And I know how to unraise it too, Sherry. So maybe sometime I'll teach you.
Thanks
for like a year to figure that out. It took me like a year to figure it out. I just did. I was just going to say, I'm wondering what the thoughts are on, I think with the Safe Parking Network, one of the things that has been really successful with it is this flexibility of the funding. And it seems like, as Garrett was talking about earlier, and I know that's a funding thing, especially the federal funding that comes down through HUD, but everything kind of gets put in this bucket, right? And it just seems so often that if we were able to just look at individuals or households as households and really try to tailor to that each household's unique need without having to label them as transitional or permanent supportive is a little different. But I think, rapid rehousing and just really adjusting, because to me, the idea of rapid rehousing, what it lacks, as I said in the comments, is that safety net, right? And there's areas that have done a better job than Pierce County, though I think that we've done a better job than most at creating that safety net. But I think it's that the ability to have, I think what we often lack with rapid rehousing is the ability for that kind of phone a friend button that people in rapid rehousing can hit when they need it, so 6 months in, they're kind of on their own now, and something happens at month 8. And rather than be able to just reach out, it's almost like our system, basically, we have to wait for them to come back into the system again, which we all know is not the right answer. So I just wish that there was more flexible funding. And I'm just curious, Garrett or others, if that seems like something that on the federal level could actually be increasing, or if it's just still needs to be in those buckets.
So the goal is to use the least expensive intervention so we can help more people, and the one that gives people the most control in their lives, which is good for people. But I agree, like our ability to move people oftentimes has to do with programs having funding that's not federally funded, right? So Catholic Community Services has a couple permanent supportive housing units that aren't federally funded or even county funded, which means they have control over who goes in. So if they have somebody failing in rapid rehousing, they can move them into an open unit, right? Like that's a really healthy thing to do, right? Like everything they've done, right? And with veterans, we can often do this as well, right? We can shift them from rapid rehousing into permanent supportive housing, right? So you tried something, it didn't work. Instead of leaving them with an eviction and homeless again, and at the front door of the homeless system, right? Like I agree, like those tools need to be there. And to Maureen's point, not everybody needs permanent supportive housing. Like we don't need to do that, right? Some people are going to be, most people are going to be completely self-sufficient, but having a pathway to get from that self-sufficiency, right, to something that has either a longer intervention, and rapid rehousing, you can keep doing it, right? You can, it doesn't have to be 6 months. It can be 9 months or 12 months, or some programs 18 months. But it's hard and it takes a lot of, I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting question. How do we better build things for people as they are and meet their needs as they change? Because just because the program doesn't work doesn't mean you should drop out.
Al, why don't we take your question, and then I think we better move on our agenda.
I want to go back to Sherry's suggestion a while ago, and what would it take to try to pair entry-level employment with access to rapid rehousing? Because you create a whole new set of motivations when somebody actually has a job than when they're on the street. I think that's worth trying to explore.
And I'll speak to that really quick, Al. We've had that conversation with the county previously, and we've talked to other providers even about accessing their rapid rehousing for our folks, and it's just the prioritization right now. So it would really take going back to the CE model as it currently is and seeing if there's any flexibility with it with the county. And I don't know, Garrett, maybe now because of the plan to end street homelessness by November, maybe now could be a time to do it. I don't know.
Well, I know that a lot of funding sources lock us in, but it's still worth trying to explore, even if it's just done sort of informally as a pilot effort.
So tying housing to anything is something that sort of makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And so I might have to get over that a little bit. The sense, because when I looked for predictors for success in rapid rehousing or predictors for success in diversion, typically it's not whether you're employed or not, or whether you have characteristics of employment. Increasing income is important, but that can be done multiple ways. That said, you know, employment's often an important part of reestablishing independence. So it's an interesting question. What happens in programs is they can cherry pick people to be part of their program. And that's something we don't like to have happen, right? Where we say, okay, well, people that aren't work ready aren't going to come in the program. And that's a good way to maybe prevent Black people from being part of your program, intentionally or unintentionally, right? Where you put some subjective evaluation of somebody's potential into the entry requirements, is that those can fall prey to our biases. Which again, not that that's a bad idea, just those are the things that I think about when I've read research on, you know, and the driving force behind Housing First, right? Which says, you know, programs should be available to absolutely everybody.
All right. We took a deep dive there. I think that was really good information, and thanks for the in-depth presentation, Garrett. looks like you're going to be busy doing the same presentation for a number of folks. So that's great. Let's shuffle our agenda a little bit to squeeze in our updates from government partners. So I would like to turn the floor over now. I'm trying to see if Clarissa's on the call from the city of Tacoma. And she is not, but is Tegan. Yeah. So is there a city of Tacoma update for today? All right, so I'm not hearing anything. Maybe Tegan stepped away from her computer for a moment. I did get a message from Valerie at the county that she had a conflicting meeting this morning, so she's not able to be here. But I can hand off to Rihanna from the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department for updates.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Good morning. So I'm gonna start with posting all this in the chat. Oh, my chat might be too big. Okay, I'll break it up in a minute. All right, so for updates, I'm gonna drop our vaccine webpage in the chat. It has the most up-to-date vaccine clinic information for the county, blogs, data, community engagement messaging tools, infographics that can be shared, Pierce County transportation information to and from clinics, and it has our call center number that anybody can call and get help getting to a vaccination clinic around the county. Also, this isn't us, but it's related to transportation, so I'm gonna share it here. DOH put out a news release 2 days ago. They're going to be, the partnerships are starting on May 10th for people who face transportation barriers and need a ride to get a vaccine. Can call the state COVID-19 information number and they will have a specialist help in coordinating rides. So like Uber and Lyft. And I think there's another one in there, but I'll post that in the chat so you all have that if you don't and can share it. We are working with Jenny Sheppy on planning second dose clinics at some shelters. And also we'll offer vaccine to anyone interested at those shelters who has not been vaccinated. And so if somebody hasn't been vaccinated yet, they can get a J&J or a Moderna if they don't want the J&J. So we're being flexible around that. And also conversations are happening on possible vax events near encampments. We're looking at a couple places. Jenny, Michael, and Valerie and I met with a larger outreach team group and got some great feedback. So if any of you were there, thank you for all that. So those conversations will continue to happen and hopefully we can get some events out of that. We have 4 shelter clinics on the calendar for next week. I will not be here at this meeting on Friday. I'll send any updates on Thursday to Robin Garrett. I will be at one of the vaccine clinics, I think at Comprehensive. So that's it for my updates, and then I'll share the contact information for Jenny and I in the chat and the rest of my message here. So that's it.
Thank you, Rihanna. Anybody have any quick questions for Rihanna? All right, I'm not seeing any. We'll appreciate the information in the chat. I'm gonna circle back to Tegan, who is gonna give some updates from the city of Tacoma.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Sorry, I'm working from one computer screen today, so I'm struggling getting all my stuff working. So give me just one sec. So today I want to provide a couple updates. So the first one is, I think this was shared last week, that we're hiring for a community safety analyst as part of our Transform Tacoma work. And this position will look at how we prioritize and how we provide safety services, opportunities to evaluate our processes and recommendations for what would be the new Office of Community Safety. I will put that in the chat as well. I want to give some highlights on some of our special initiatives and programs. So last Friday, the Salvation Army Winter Warming Center closed, and the program staff and city staff were able to place everyone in a permanent solution or a safe location. So that was a great success. And we really appreciate what the Salvation Army did to support single men. Also, I think we also highlighted last week, a hygiene station was set up at I-705 and A Street. It opened last Wednesday, so that is moving forward. We don't have an update on our youth drop-in center and overnight shelter, but we're still working on it. So hopefully we'll have something very soon to share with everybody. It's very exciting. I know the county will also discuss rental assistance, so that link is still going. Please have people apply if they need assistance with that. I will also put in the chat our census and outcomes for temporary emergency shelters that are also on our website. And we presented at council this Tuesday, so that was the 4th, May 4th, where we talked about different models to implement at 69th and Proctor, and how we could envision a model of implementation. And I will also put in the chat a link to the study session. And next Tuesday, we will again be presenting to council, so I will be sending those as well. And if anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great. So if anybody has questions, just go ahead and raise your hand or speak right up.
Hi, Garrett.
So I've made a few trips to the hygiene stations, and they tend never to have water in the hand washing station.
Okay.
And so I did 3 last week and there wasn't any water. And then this week I did 3 trips to both of the hygiene stations, and one of the stations had water on one day in it. So that seems like an opportunity maybe to do a little problem solving.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. I'll pass that along. Thank you.
Yeah, and the garbage at the 705 site, they were full and there's garbage everywhere there. So
yeah, and I think since it was the first week, I know there was a lot already existing there. So hopefully if we need to pick it up a little sooner, I'll pass that along as well. Thank you.
Jeffrey?
Yesterday I was at the 8th and I, and there was a padlock on one of the on the ADA toilet, and I'm not sure where the padlock came from.
That sounds interesting. I'll pass that along as well, so we can address that. Thank you. Anything else? If not, happiest of Fridays, everybody.
Yep, looks like we're good. And if folks do have other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat.
Absolutely, or you can email me directly as well.
Awesome.
All right, thanks everyone.
All right, so let's shift back to our regular agenda. We have a couple items that Garrett wanted to quickly cover.
thanks, Rob. We have a number of kind of representatives that attend other meetings and kind of represent our group. And we would like to make these a little more formal, right? So things like the Equity Action Network that the health department runs, and the Continuum of Care is a good example of a more formal one. But there's a number of these groups. And so I'm not going to go over them now because I've talked too much already today, but there is a list of them on our website. So if you go to the website, coalition website, I put a link in, but on the top nav bar, it says committees, and you can see what committees people have requested someone to be part of. One of them that we probably should be looking at in the near term is Chiquata Elder with the city. is looking for somebody on the Tacoma Rental Housing Code Stakeholders Group. So again, if you or someone in your organization, right, these are super amazing professional development opportunities, right? I mean, you don't need to know things to be on these committees. You need to be able to commit to listening, going to the meetings, right? And identifying areas that the coalition might be interested in and bringing that stuff back to the coalition, right? So really, you're just you're a liaison, right? You don't have to make decisions. You don't have to wear an official T-shirt, right? You really just need to be listening to things of interest there and chiming in when they have things that might be able to be, you know, moved along by having the coalition more involved, something like that. So anyway, we'd like to formally vote people into these positions, and so if you could take a look at those and volunteer yourself, volunteer your staff member, volunteer your supervisor, volunteer a friend, that would be great, right? And again, the more people we, you know, kind of get into these roles, like it's fun stuff for some people. So hopefully we can encourage that. Maureen.
Oh,
You're
okay.
muted, yeah.
I know. Now I'm okay. Thank you. Or probably better when I'm muted. But anyway, in addition to these being great professional opportunities for people, really think about if you're a frontline staff person or if you're a supervisor or a manager, look around and encourage people to put themselves forward or you put them forward. And this is our chance to diversify our representation as well. So there may be, you know, maybe we want 2 people, that sort of thing. But in my career, these are some of the best professional development opportunities that I had.
So, and you can suggest them. There's a link on the website to suggest a committee we should be involved in. Like the county has an opioid task force, right? Opioids impact some people experiencing homelessness. Wouldn't it be great to listen into those meetings with an ear to homelessness issues? And so it's once a month at that, you know, you report back 3 minutes once a month, right? So it's not a huge amount of time for some of these committees. Again, great opportunity. So those are up there. I'm going to send an email out, but hopefully we'll be able to bring some to vote next week. Volunteer.
Thanks, Garrett. And did you also then want to cover the vote that we want to take related to the Safe Sites for All?
So currently we have 2 sort of official committees. We have the we have the Housing Committee and we have our Steering Committee. There's been another committee that's been peripheral, although it's pretty much all coalition members, that was started as a safe parking site that Jan and Colin have been spearheading. And Jeffrey joined on, and there's a lot of other people, but it sort of morphed into what's now called Safe Sites for All. And the coalition's doing more to support it. And I just wanted to put out to all of you that I would like us to make it a formal committee, sort of joint committee. So not something that we're doing anything other than saying is that they're doing work of the coalition and kind of wanting to represent it that way. Does that sound good, Colin? So our goal isn't to like take over their messaging or anything, but really support them and just say pretty much everything they do is in line with what we're trying to do, which is Safe Sites for All. So I've got a little poll. And the question is, should the coalition make the Safe Sites for All a formal coalition committee or joint committee? And we have big plans for this, maybe to take on some more of the responsibility around the coalition's involvement with the county's, you know, safe shelter for everyone by November 1st. So I think this is kind of part of wanting to just prepare ourselves with some good structures to meet the need. And I forgot my harmonica again. I did make the poll though, that's something. All right, I'm gonna give you 5, 4, 3, 2, ended early. So 20, I can share the results. We have 26 people yes, nobody no, a number of abstentions. And so we've got another committee. So join them. All the information about it is on our coalition website. So that includes the meeting link, and I think, is there a listserv now too? I think there's a listserv. Yep, there's a listserv for it. You can sign up for on the listserv page. And thank you.
Awesome. All right, so we've managed to more than fill this meeting, and we've got a lot to cover still. Looking at our agenda, Maureen, the next thing I have is advocacy updates.
All right, thank you. So quickly, we've all been waiting for the American Rescue Plan emergency housing vouchers to come, and they are coming. The guidance is out. I sent that to everybody because it's pretty clear guidance from HUD. And so the most recent update I have locally, I don't know what the allocations are to either housing authority. I don't know if they know yet. I haven't seen anything published or received anything from my contacts. In the guidance, it's very clear that the relationship is between the public housing authority. These are going to be regular housing vouchers, except that they are targeted to people experiencing homelessness, people at risk for homelessness, and people fleeing domestic violence. And so the relationship in the guidance is between the public housing authority and the local continuum of care. And so while we are waiting to see how Pierce County chooses to handle that, because there are options that the continuum of care can take, I think our question for the coalition is, how do we want to be involved in helping set priorities, or in whatever way, as the continuum of care and the county and the housing authorities work out their relationship. So I'll stay in contact with my housing authority contacts and see what else we can find. But those of you who are housing voucher nerds, it's all there in 40 pages or whatever it is. As far as I know, the home money, the other specific homeless money in the American Rescue Plan that's coming through HUD, there's no additional information to date, and we're in contact with both the city and county who already know what their allocations are. They're just over 5 million each, but what the guidance is, the process, we don't know yet, or at least I don't. The state's going to have, the Department of Commerce is going to have a meeting on May 17th for all housing folks to talk about the money that's in the budget, the programs, how these are going to be handled. And remember, there's about 125 million for rapid shelter acquisition. That's the hotel money. And I don't know if there's going to be a match requirement or not. If there is, we're going to have to encourage the county council to reconsider its recent decisions about the ARPA money, I think. So there are, with the county and the city, there are two things now we're moving into, and so both of these jurisdictions, probably a whole lot of them, their fiscal year is a calendar year. So they're in the process of making any budget revisions to their current operating budgets, all right? And they'll finalize those sometime later in the summer. They're also, on the county side, they've started their next biennial budget process. So we're going to have to keep an eye on both, do we have recommendations for any reallocation of funding during the summer cycle of the current year's money, or do we have recommendations going forward as well? I sent out to both county councils as well as the staff, the appropriate staff on human services and NCS and community and economic development, because that's where housing is in the city. Notices of both the webinar that the Housing Development Consortium out of Seattle, King County is putting on Monday on housing and healthcare. And I'm pleased that Councilmember Amy Kruger got very excited about that and said that she plans to attend or hopes to attend. I think that is directly related to the presentation from the ad hoc committee, and especially to Courtney Chandler being willing to tell her personal story in that meeting. And it was clear that Courtney's story moved Councilmember Krueger, and also Councilmember Hitchen said that she plans to attend the Department of Commerce meeting on May 17th. I think these are important because the county council appears to me to be much more, at this point anyway, kind of hands-on, involved in the funding and the programs around homelessness than we've seen in the immediate past, or that I've seen in the immediate past. I think that our issues going forward are following the money. So there's a huge amount of money, as you know, that's coming from the feds and the state. Some of it's here, some of it'll be coming, and most of that money has wide eligibility opportunities. And one of those opportunities is to be able to target by income. All right, at 50% AMI, that's $50,000 a year for one person in Pierce County. All right, those aren't the people that we're most concerned about. We're concerned about those folks who are down at 0, 10, 20, 30% AMI. And so, everything's political. All politics is local, if you're old enough to remember Tip O'Neill. But we have opportunities to weigh in. And so that's part of what we want to be able to look into. I think we need to really prepare for these planning processes. And so this is where, in terms of how we end street homelessness or under the tree homelessness or wherever you are homeless by November 1st, and the better our menu of safe site options, the clearer we can be about them, the more cost information we have, the more success information we have from other jurisdictions, the better we can help these two planning committees inform the work that they're doing and get where we want to go. I want to remind everybody that our new Coalition Housing Committee, I sent the invite out to everybody. So please, if housing is your thing, please join us. It's next Thursday from 4 to 5, which was the best my poor doodle poll could do, but that's where we're starting. And I'm going to have a minder do any other doodles that I do. And the other thing is there's a housing listserv now. So you can sign up for that housing listserv, even if you don't plan to be on the committee. And I'm going to start moving housing specific resources to that listserv. And then, yeah, I think that's it. I think the other thing is, I don't know if Cynthia's still on it. She has to leave these calls earlier, but I'm hoping that Cynthia or somebody from the League of Women Voters has got the candidate forums on their agenda for the fall, because we will have city races. And I think that the way that Al's friend passed on how to run a candidate forum is probably the best that I've seen in my life. And certainly Councilmember Walker, when we met with her a couple of weeks ago, said it was the best candidate forum that she participated in. So people from the league, hopefully check with Cynthia, and if maybe she can't do it, maybe somebody from the Tacoma League kind of put that on a sticky note so we don't miss that. So that's kind of it right now. Just thank you.
I guess I should unmute myself. So Maureen, can we shift gears and talk about what the conversations have continued to be with the city council around the proposed camping ban?
Certainly. So those of you who may not be following this, the city council did prepare an ordinance, use of public property and a code change in April, early April. And we, the mayor reached out and asked for our response, our reaction to it. And we did respond saying, basically, don't do this. And Councilmember Toms was a prime sponsor on this ordinance. And he then reached out to me within about an hour of receiving our communication and said he'd like to talk. And so we began talking. He has met with the Safe Sites for All people. He's met with 6 of us from the coalition. Usually 5 of us are able to attend. We've met 3 times now. And that group includes from the city attorney, who is there for every meeting, Councilmember Toms, who is there for every meeting, the deputy mayor, who has been there for all or part of 2 of the meetings, and the mayor, who has been there for all of or part, I think, of each meeting, but 2 for sure. And from the coalition side, Jeffrey Boyce, Teresa Power-Drudas, Rob Huff, myself, Garrett Nyland, and Kevin Glackencoley. And what we have tried to do is move this ordinance, which I reached out to Justia Bauman from the National Homelessness Law Center immediately, also Jennifer Ammons with Northwest Justice, Lori Davenport and Casey Burton from Tacoma Pro Bono have joined our legal back office, if you will. And we have used the assistance that they have provided. And Garrett did some edits on the second iteration, I think, of the ordinance. And when we saw it yesterday, they had accepted our edit. So we have moved this ordinance from being based in the power of the police. That part's gone. We've moved its implementation into the Office of Equity and Human Rights in conjunction with the chief of police. It was totally under the police. We have, the deputy mayor had moved the criminal misdemeanor component and the $1,000 fine and 90 days in jail. He had already moved that to civil infractions for the first and second ticket for camping on a public place, which is anything public, all right? Any government, anything. Government that doesn't have to own it, they can lease it. Anything, all right? Couldn't be broader. And then easements even. And then he moved the criminal misdemeanor to $250 fine and 30 days in jail, one or both. Oh, and the civil infractions were at $25 for the fines, and I think it was, I can't remember if there's jail time on that one or not. Excuse me. So, but we came back with, so there are 2 big areas right now, all right, that for me, and then other people can weigh in. One is this issue of any type of criminalization. And the 6 of us are divided. I'll tell you that. And I suspect the coalition is divided. And I know folks who can't attend this meeting are divided because I get their messages, thankfully. The city of Tacoma already has a trespassing law, and it has a destruction of property law. So my question is, who does this use of public property or no camping or urban camping, whatever we want to call this ordinance, actually serve? What we are told is that it's a tool to get people to accept shelter who would otherwise not do so. And it is also something that will please the people in the neighborhoods and the businesses, because now there will be a way to force people off of public places. And I think that we've tried some things like, well, could you have community service instead of jail time? Is there a way to keep things off of people's records? Are there, what if we had a pot of money to pay the fines? Lori Davenport provided us with an LFO report, the legal financial obligations. I think I have that right. Study that was done out of 2019, showing the disproportionality of people of color who have LFOs, and of the impact, the incredible impact on their ability to pay rent, that sort of thing. If you work in this area, you know that $25 might as well be $1,000 for some people, that fines accrue interest. And then there is the ethical issue of criminalization at all. So we have to deal with that. We got the city council to put a pause on this ordinance. They were going to consider this like 3 weeks ago, I think now. And they put a pause on it at the very last minute, not even in the study session that day, but before council started. They put a pause on with a May 18th return date, hoping that by May 18th, the coalition would sign off on a formal ordinance. We have not agreed to sign off on anything. What we have said is that we will keep working as long as we feel that we're making progress. We have, I think, for me, we are in a position where nobody from that city group has questioned any information we have brought forward as factual information. They have accepted what we've told them. They have sometimes asked for suggestions, that sort of thing. And the other, besides that legal question, which I don't expect to resolve today, but we've got to grapple with this, because I think there will be a point where the coalition's going to be asked to approve. And a second thing is timing. So we brought up timing of the reading of the final ordinance, which the expectation had been May 18th. And we have been saying that it makes more sense, we feel, for the timing of any eventual ordinance to match up or to align with the county's plan to end street homelessness, which has right now a proposed county council approved date on that final plan of July 12th. And also, given the fact that the city itself is engaging in a 5-year homelessness strategy, and it just seemed to make more sense to us to try and align these. And the city representatives are considering that. Councilmember Tom said he is not wedded to May 18th. What he wants is progress. So I see a couple of questions, but before we take questions, I want to invite Rob, Teresa, Jeffrey, Garrett, if there's something that you want to add before we take any questions. Jeffrey.
This was very hard negotiation, because I've always believed that criminalization of the homeless is the wrong approach. And I still believe this, but I also see the city's point where, and I've met some of these people. The point is there is a small number of people who just won't accept appropriate, acceptable shelters. And these are the people that the city says they're most concerned with, and that they don't have a way of dealing with them. I've tried to make the argument that you still have a trespassing law, which unfortunately has some very onerous problems, 30 days in jail and a lot of money. Or do we find a way to work with the city in trying to find a way to make it less onerous and in a way that will help further our movement to a more equitable way of helping the homeless. The fact that we have several stages building up to a final is the part that satisfied me, although we currently do not have in place those 2 steps that we need, and believe that as we move forward with the ending homelessness by November 1st, those things will be in place, as those have been part of the conversations. I'm not saying that this is the right thing at this moment, and the timing is terrible. But think about how, when we offer shelters to people, how are we offering those? What kind of shelters are we offering? Are they acceptable and appropriate for that individual? And this is how I am looking at this particular law.
I want to add, just before Teresa, I see your hand, following Jeffrey, is that one of the other suggestions we made in terms of timing of extending this out farther was to actually do some pilots to provide some new options for safe sites and see what people's response is, so that we are able to show ourselves, the city, the community, and the community of people who are experiencing homelessness, that in fact we can provide options that people want to accept. So Teresa, and then Rob and Garrett, if you have anything, and then Sherry, I see you. Thank you. Teresa.
So we have no idea how many of these people who would refuse any options, even if we had a really wonderful menu of options. We don't know how many of those people there will be, and we won't be able to say how many of those people there would be until we actually have those options available. So that's been our main message, that has been unanimous, that it doesn't make sense to work so hard on tuning an ordinance that we can't enforce. And they've acknowledged this too. It's not enforceable at this point. So that's one hand of this, is that even if it is adopted, it's not enforceable until there are shelter options. So to me, our energy should be being spent on getting these shelter options available. And I believe, though, that there will be movement to put an ordinance of some kind in place, because there are other people who really care about their neighborhoods or their businesses or whatever, and they don't have the information that we have. So I do think if we were going to do this right, we would work really hard on community interactions and not on being divisive at all within the community, but really being good listeners and trying to tamp down some of the fears that are there, some legitimate fears, some legitimate concerns. Instead of saying these are the bad guys, say these are legitimate concerns. This is how we can best solve this. So I'm frustrated that the ordinance is even being considered at this point, but I think the work that's being done to make it less weird is good. For one thing, right in the ordinance, it says if someone is indigent, they are not going to be fined. They're not going to be forced to pay the fine. Right in the ordinance, it says that there will be this expungement step that is possible. I think they're trying to do something that actually has some compassion to it, but also answers the concerns of the community. And I hope we don't get into a very divisive thing about this, because again, it can't be enforced. It doesn't make sense to do it right now because it can't be enforced, but if they do go forward with it, it can't be enforced.
Garrett or Rob, do you want to add anything before we go to other people's questions?
Okay. I don't think so. The one thing I would say is that I think in this whole series of meetings, my approach has been that it's worth spending the time talking with the council members about the ordinance, but I have a hard time imagining the coalition supporting or endorsing the ordinance. So I'll just leave it at that.
And Sherry, your hand is down, but I didn't mean to make your blood boil. I saw the comment in the chat, but so if you didn't get all the questions answered, please.
Nope, I did. You were speaking, and I just, we haven't had the conversation, or I haven't heard it. It's probably been had about Martin v. Boise, and so I was still concerned about the timeline and why is this happening now and why is it legal? So you've answered the question, and I'm still angry and agree with Rob that I don't support the conversation when we've just decided to move towards ending street homelessness and have such a robust goal. Why do we have to complement that with, okay, and now we're also going to talk about criminalizing, so.
I think I totally. I think that its presence, the fact that it came forward, has to do in part with the frustration that not just the elected officials in the city are receiving, but also staff in response to this very visible street homelessness that people are seeing in a way that they've not seen before. And these have been like negotiations, and they have been hard, but I really feel like they're listening to us, they're believing us, and we're seeing evidence of that in the new language. So yeah.
It's
Colin.
just frustrating because we're seeing it more. It's more visible. It's because the crisis is worsening because there's less housing available. And so I get it, but it just seems to have a punitive measure when we're taking so much focus on creating robust solutions just seems counterproductive. Yeah, that's all. I typed it out, Maureen.
I guess I do want to chime in, Maureen. I don't know if you want to do Teresa and Colin first, though.
I did. Let's let Colin. He's been waiting, and then Colin.
I kind of look at this from a different angle, and part of this is, when this ordinance was initially put in place, I was the guy who was in charge of talking to the individuals about this ordinance. And when I was in the city of Olympia, we had a similar ordinance, and I was in charge of doing it there also. And what I will tell you is I totally agree with the criminalization piece, but I also, we don't have to look much further than some of the challenges that are going on in areas like Seattle. If there's not boundaries, and if there's not like the ability to say, hey, you can't be here, you can't be on Yakima Avenue, but we have ideally, like I've said before, 2 or 3 other options for that individual, right? And I think as long as we have those, to me, in my time in Tacoma and Olympia, I don't think I've ever seen anyone get ticketed or arrested for not moving along, right? I've had to deal with many challenging situations with people that don't have to move along, but I've never actually seen law enforcement that I can think of arrest someone in either city that I worked in this area. To me, when I look at this, and I agree with Teresa, they can't do anything with this ordinance. So I think on some level, to me, I actually think that this ordinance is a benefit for us and can be, not exactly the way it is, but I think some of the things Teresa said is a benefit because it actually holds the city accountable, right? Without this ordinance in place, there's no language that says, that talks about the criminalization. They've already set themselves up with this ordinance that if they move someone along that doesn't, and there's not places for those individuals to go, then they're arresting them, then they're criminalizing that individual, right? So to me, I look at this in a totally different way. And I think that on some level, if you don't have some sort of because I will also say, and I'm probably going to piss a lot of people off, I've dealt with hundreds of times individuals that until someone is there and like, hey, we're moving, that's when that individual will move. And then they will go. And then a week later, they're turning and saying to James or to myself or to someone else who's working with them, hey man, thank you so much for moving me along. You know, I think that we need to meet people where they're at, but if we don't have some sort of accountability, and to me, when I say enforcement, 90%, 95% of that enforcement is done by the Matthews from the city, the Tegans, the outreach teams, the path workers. It's just simply a conversation to move people along. But I don't know, that's my say on it. I know it's a little bit different. I totally agree with criminalizing, that it can't happen, but I don't see that as what this is. It can be if we go to the extreme, for sure.
Sherry, we didn't pick the timing on the ordinance, okay? I mean, we didn't create it. We felt we needed to respond. That's an imperfect world we're in out there. Let's see, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I would like to add that the city attorney did agree that until shelters are in place, appropriate shelters are in place, and I've got them talking about adequate and appropriate shelters, that this law will not be legal nor can it be used. So the city attorney is telling me that too. I think that it's the right tool for us to move with the city in trying to end homelessness. It is a tool, that's all. It is not an intent to criminalize homeless people. It is a tool to help the city and sometimes us in helping somebody get appropriate and adequate shelter.
So we have different positions among the six of us, and I'm absolutely against criminalization in this ordinance. But we're all there with our perspectives. Anybody else quickly?
I would just quickly say that I think we have different positions, but I am totally against criminalization in this ordinance also. So I think that there is some areas where we are, and I think Jeffrey is, and I think Teresa is. So I would say that there are some different positions, but there are also some areas, I think more so, where we're all agreeing. I'm not hearing anyone say, we totally want to criminalize this and arrest people that aren't following this, because that's nothing that I've heard from anyone.
And I'd chime into, the city of Tacoma has created a powerful narrative that resources are available and people are refusing it. You know, month after month, we've heard this narrative over years, and even the county putting out numbers that are not true about how many beds go unused every night. And I think part of this, I would love us to see it as, can we create something that creates good programs for people experiencing homelessness? Again, cops aren't going to make the rules. Human rights and equity is going to make the rules, right? Those kind of things give me hope. But I think bringing the public on board in a way that can help sustain funding for shelter and programs in the long term has some benefit. And so if we can do this in a way that doesn't harm our most vulnerable, but provides some help and gets a little more public support for an effort like this, then that could be magical thinking. I'm not immune to the fact that I can be projecting the way I wish the world was. And I've got a cute little poll if you want me to do that at some point, Marie.
Yeah, let's go ahead. We're bumping time here.
So I put a little poll together, and then you can wrap up after that, Marie?
Yep, sounds good.
So these are, and don't start clicking. You can click as many as you want. Basically, my question is, what are some things we would need for us to not hate or to maybe support a camping ban? And I'm with Rob. I'm not sure the coalition will end up being able to support something like this. Although we influence its structure, we may not support the final product. But so the question is, what would it take for us to support it? And there's an option on here that says, ain't gonna support it, no way, no how. Just wanna make sure that's at the end. So I'd support it if acceptable shelter options for everybody, right? If there's social service outreach as part of the work we're doing, if police are an absolute last option, if no police are involved ever, that's the only way I'd support this. Or I'd only support this if there was no jail time, period. Or only support it if there's no consequences for camping when shelter is available. Not sure what that means exactly. That's the problem with me writing this and not getting anyone to review it. I'd only support it if there were no fines available. Again, no camping ban, no matter what, right? That's an option on the list. And I'd only do it if there's no permanent record of consequences. Again, how real it is to make these happen, right, is a good question, and that's the goal. And you can abstain. And again, I think this will just maybe help us to understand the room a little better. Each one of these is mushy, and so don't feel like we're locking anything in. And I hate the timing too.
Did we mention that this poll, there's really nothing binding. It's just trying to help inform the conversation.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, that's
Of
the
the
questions are
people
mushy.
in the room today.
The uses are mushy. Yeah, we're not making, I just think it might help us to be like, oh, you know, if everybody's fine with jail time, then wow, I guess I misread the room, right? Although I'm looking at it and that's not the case so far. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end it here in like 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So I am seeing that acceptable shelter absolutely must be available. Social outreach is important. Police as a last option. Not many people said no policeman involvement ever, which is somewhat surprising. Only 13% said no jail time was very important. And having no consequences, again, was not very popular. So we want there to be a consequence, and we're okay with some police involvement. But jail time and fines we're seeing not as attractive. So someone's got to put in the chat what the consequence should be if it's not a fine or jail time, because the city was having trouble, as were we, coming up with things. But community service, you know, things like that look good. And only 2 people said no camping ban no matter what, which again surprises me. And then most everybody was interested in no permanent record of consequences. So I will make sure this is in the minutes so you can see it later on. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to leave it up for another couple minutes.
Sherry Jensen, I saw your comment in the chat, and Councilmember Toms did suggest that maybe community service could be linked to the Vallejo's new city hire program. So start thinking.
You can do it. Sadie, by the way, is on the call. Sadie's our new hire supervisor. So Rob, I'll connect with you maybe and get Sadie on the schedule for next Friday.
That would be awesome.
And Jennifer, thanks. Jennifer Ammons, I just saw your note. People with disabilities was one of the flags on the original ordinance. And I don't know that it got spelled out in the most current draft. Garrett, maybe you could make a note of that to check the most current draft to make sure we've got that language clear. Thank you.
All right, so it looks like we have hit 11 o'clock.
Can I just add one thing for everybody before we go? First of all, thank you for trusting us to do this. The second thing is, if you're worried about the eviction moratorium and the new ruling on the CDC's legal ability, it does not affect Washington State. We are under Governor Inslee's eviction moratorium. Our moratorium holds until the end of June right now.
I see your hand, Al.
Well, this has nothing to do with anything we've been talking about, but Michael Mira is retiring, and it strikes me as a good thing to write a letter on behalf of the Homeless Coalition thanking Michael for really outstanding work service.
And we probably should in that letter also recognize and offer our support for the new interim director, April Black.
Yeah, and we could invite Michael to join the Homeless Coalition.
Absolutely.
There you go.
People may not know that Michael, when he was with, I think, Columbia Legal Services, was the attorney who, with the Washington State Coalition for the Homeless, which I chaired at the time, we brought the children's lawsuit, and Michael brought that to us, and eventually we won. It was brought on behalf of homeless children and their families against the state of Washington, and the first settlement on Christmas Eve of 1997 was $27 million.
That's good. Al, are you volunteering to draft a letter?
No, I never volunteer for anything.
Well,
I am not, well, no, to be serious, I am not in a leadership position in terms of having a leadership title.
we are all leadership here.
You want a title? I can come up with
Give you a title.
Maureen's really good at that. All right. I want to thank everybody for attending. I know a few folks have dropped off already, but we have exceeded our time. We managed to fill 2 hours. I don't know how we did that. So everybody have a great weekend. And if you want to hang on the call and help planning for the next few weeks Friday meetings, please do. Otherwise, see y'all next time.